Well, greetings and peace be upon you all. Assalamu alaikum. We're coming to you live from the MSU Tollgate Conference Center in Novi. My name is Muhammad Khalil, and I'm the director of the Michigan State University Muslim Studies program, as well as a professor of religious studies. Truly delighted to welcome you all to our inaugural Malcolm and Ann Kerr Muslim Studies Community Lecture featuring our distinguished guest, Professor Ann Kerr. This year, we actually launched 2 community lecture series, and both have the name Malcolm. The other is the Malcolm X Lecture. And both were made possible thanks to a generous gift by Dr. Iltifat Hamzavi. Among other things, Dr. Hamzavi is a renowned dermatologist and activist, and the father of MSU alum Zakir Hamzavi. And this gift was made in honor of Dr. Hamzavi's inspiring father, the late Dr. Latifat Hamzavi. I want to thank Dr. Hamzavi for sponsoring this event, and we're hoping this will be the first in a series of annual lectures. So if you would like to support future iterations of this lecture, please let us know. And if you'd like to support us in other ways, we're happy to set up meetings to see what you have in mind. At this time, I'd like to invite Dr. Hamzavi to say a few words. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Iltifat Hamzavi.
Thank you so much. And the gift is made on behalf of the Hamzavi Foundation and my brother Saad Hamzavi, who's also a dermatologist and also active in supporting academia at other institutions as well as this one, is also part of that. And my sister Asra, who could not be here, and our spouses and her mother are very actively supporting this initiative. One of the Urdu statements that my father would always reference would be this term, Mil Jul Ke Raho. Mil Jul Ke Raho is a concept that Professor Kerr referenced in his introductory remarks at the last Malcolm's lecture, which is superficially more like networking, hanging out with the boys, or the girls, or whatever gender you're using. But the deeper meaning is working it out. Finding that deep place in the human psyche to live and let live, but not in a tolerance perspective, but a deep connection. Mil Jul Ke Raho, work it out with your family. Mil Jul Ke Raho, work it out with your friends. Mil Jul Ke Raho, work it out with your fellow Michiganians, your fellow Americans, your global citizens, humanity. And it comes from Urdu poetry to an extent. And this concept of tanhai, loneliness or longing, and this longing for each other. And you can look at that longing from a religious perspective. You can also look at it as a longing for us to find common ground. And it's such a pleasure to sponsor this lecture and what you're doing, Professor Khalil, and that you're bringing in some of the most renowned people who have lived their lives trying to work it out. They're trying to accomplish Mil Jul Ke Raho across time, across people, across ideas, across continents, across language, across religion, across denominations. That concept is very much part of the ethos of Michigan State University. My University of Michigan middle son, who is a zealot at the University of Michigan, still cringes at the fact that his uncle and father are supporting an initiative at Michigan State University. We have our son, we also have a niece, Sophia Khader, who also attends the university. And we have been touched by the initiative of the university supporting it. But it's very much part of the ethos of Michigan State. It's a land-grant university. The concept was to educate our citizenry, not just in agricultural methods, not just in the mechanical methods or the scientific methods, but also in the liberal arts. And at this moment, when Ukraine is suffering bombardment in Russia, when the Russians are suffering economic sanctions, when the Afghan economy is collapsing and creating another refugee crisis, when more Yemeni are killed in an hour than they've been killed in the entire war in Ukraine, when so many people in the Middle East are displaced, well over 1 million people in Iraq, millions of people in Syria. And then my own parents were displaced by the partition of India, in which our family home was destroyed and lost half of our family, and we ended up somehow in the United States. There's a moment in time where we take some of the ideas of Malcolm Kerr and Ann Kerr and believe that there's a better place. Now, we don't know how to always get there, but we can maybe frame the question in a way that Dr. Kerr will probably present in the next few minutes. But it's very nice to have a professor come and speak to us in a theoretical construct. But it's very different to have somebody of her stature who has lived that and who has inspired and infused her children with that concept. And I remember my middle son, who was educated for a vocation, not an avocation, but his vocational interest is sports and how to use college to get to the best job you can. And your son, Steve Kerr, made a comment about the Muslim ban. He's like, Dad, the guy's so educated. And I started looking up who his dad was, Malcolm Kerr. And the fact that Professor Kerr's at Michigan State is a gift to all of us. So Professor Kerr, I'm going to hand the microphone back over to Professor Khalil to show us how to accomplish Mil Chulke Raho. And my father, and wherever he's at right now, says thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hamzawi. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the other individuals who made this event possible. They include our administrative lead, Mary Ferdowsi, and our advancement and development team, including Michael Lindau, Daniel Spatafor, who was recently in advancement, Tracy Zambet, Brian Keener, Michelle Jenkins, Sandy Cox, and Claire Drake. And I'm sure there are others. I also want to thank Devontae Kennedy for filming this, and Michael Mathis and his team here at MSU Tollgate for hosting us. And I also want to thank you all for attending. And perhaps needless to say, none of this would be possible without the support and endorsement of the Kerr family. So many thanks to you all. Now, before we begin, I'd like to say a word about why we chose to establish this lecture. The late Professor Malcolm Kerr was an influential scholar of the Middle East who eventually became president of the American University of Beirut. Incidentally, as some of you well know, the Middle East Studies Association of North America offers a dissertation award in his name. I applied for it and did not receive it. His widow, Professor Ann Kerr, has studied and taught in the Middle East and has authored 2 books on the region, Come With Me from Lebanon and Painting the Middle East. Professors Malcolm and Ann Kerr represent scholars with a genuine desire to understand that which is often misunderstood. Now, as you'll hear this evening, the Kerr family has experienced profound tragedy, assassination in 1984. And this tragedy could have easily influenced the family to alter their course, to adopt a different mindset, a different approach. Yet this tragedy has not weakened their spirit of open-mindedness and their calls for understanding. Many of you may recall Ann and Malcolm's son. This was just, Dr. Hamzawi just made reference to this, when the accomplished NBA coach Steve Kerr spoke out very vocally against the so-called Muslim travel ban. And for many of us, that was a very encouraging sign at a time when you feel alone. This particular lecture series seeks to highlight the Kerr spirit of open-mindedness and understanding in contexts that may seem complicated and challenging. Fact of the matter is, we're never going to agree on everything. But the least we can do is to be sincere in our quest for knowledge and understanding and to recognize our shared humanity. Now, I thought it would be fitting, before we get to our main speaker, I thought it would be fitting to invite one of Professor Ann Kerr's all-star sons to introduce her. And I'm here referring to my MSU colleague, Professor John Kerr. Professor John Kerr is a professor in the Department of Community Sustainability and a leader in the field. He received his PhD in Applied Economics from Stanford University. And before joining the faculty at MSU in 1999, he worked at the International Crops Research Institute for Semi-Arid Tropics in Hyderabad, India, and the International Food Policy Research Institute in Washington, D.C. Please join me in welcoming Professor John Kerr.
Thank you very much. I'm really delighted to have this opportunity to introduce my own mother, Ann Kerr, to give the inaugural Malcolm and Ann Kerr Muslim Studies community lecture. I don't think that many people get a chance to introduce their own mother at an event like this, and it's really quite a nice opportunity, really kind of for me to step back and think about what kind of person she is and to share that with you. So I'd just like to tell a few little stories about her that will help you get a better sense of that. So first of all, my mom has incredible energy. She's hard to keep up with. She devotes a huge amount of that energy to promoting international understanding, especially between the United States and the Muslim world, particularly the Arab world. And yeah, as I said, just a few stories to help share that. So after my dad was assassinated in Beirut while serving as the president of the American University of Beirut, a lot of her acquaintances back in her American home of Los Angeles just assumed she moved back to California, which was very far from war and terrorism. But instead, she moved to Cairo, where she taught English at the American University in Cairo for the next 6 years. And this was where her people were, meaning people who could understand what motivated her, why she and my dad had gone to Beirut in the first place, and why she wanted to continue her personal mission despite family tragedy, personal tragedy. After 6 years in Cairo, she moved back to Los Angeles, in part to take care of her aging father, my grandfather. She was in her mid-50s, and she had her eye on a job at UCLA in which she would coordinate cultural programs for international Fulbright scholars. At the time, the only problem was that there was someone already occupying that job, and that person was pushing 70, and all my siblings and I could think of, can't that person give it up and let someone younger have an opportunity? Well, that was over 30 years ago, and sure enough, that person did retire. And my mom took the job, and that was 30 years ago. So she's still going strong in her work, giving those Fulbright scholars the best experience you can imagine. And every term she teaches a course in which young American students learn about international understanding, in part through lectures by the Fulbright scholars. My mom travels like crazy. She doesn't let a small thing like advanced age get in the way. And most of her travels have two main themes. One is family, which includes visiting kids, grandkids, even a great-grandchild now, scattered from California all the way to England. And the other theme is her work to promote international understanding. And in fact, the timing of this visit is dictated by that. She's on her way back from New York City, where she was attending the board meetings of the American University in Beirut, which she does twice every year. And she wasn't going to be able to attend. We couldn't make it later than this. Couldn't make it next month. We thought about that because she's going to be on a 2-week study tour in the Middle East. And so finally, one last example of her energy and commitment to international understanding. So I mentioned she had some difficulties with her travel last night. She didn't get any sleep, woke up really early. No complaints whatsoever, not flustered at all. The only thing is she commented repeatedly is how it made her think about, in the face of her trivial little hassles, how difficult life must be for people who are refugees from wars, speaking specifically of Ukrainians. But that she's luckily for her, she doesn't have any such things to worry about, and the world is full of much more serious problems. So with that, friends, please welcome me. Please join me in welcoming my mother, Anne Kerr.
So much needless to say, here it is. So needless to say, this is sort of overwhelming, and I almost don't need to say anything more because you've all spoken so beautifully of the purpose of our all being together here tonight. But I have a soft voice, so if you can't hear me, please raise your hand. I've really enjoyed meeting so many interesting and diverse people here, and I think you're doing a wonderful thing by starting this lectureship. And it's evidenced here tonight, all ages, from different countries, different ethnic backgrounds and religious backgrounds. So it's really my pleasure to be here, and my daughter-in-law Kim, my son John. Special pleasure, really. Thank you for starting this lectureship, Dr. Hamza. And I'm having trouble changing the Arabic pronunciation to Persian. I think the best thing tonight, since you all have heard lots of things about my most recent activities, is to start with long ago. And it was quite an amazing story. And I think most of you here were barely college age when I went off to Beirut in 1954 to go to the American University for my junior year abroad. I calculated today that's 68 years ago, and that's history. So this book that Dr. Hamza told you about actually covers a lot of that lifespan in the Middle East. And when I looked at it today on the airplanes that I took, and I was thinking this is more of a history book now, because the events back then so different from what's going on now. But I think we have so much value in seeing the bigger picture. But I'd like to just then tell you a little bit about the American University of Beirut. We have some alumni here. Right. Yes, so the American University of Beirut is a remarkable place, and it personifies what we're talking about tonight, this theme of international understanding and bringing people together, East and West. So it was founded in 1866 by people coming out from the American Board of Foreign Missions, which was definitely a Protestant organization, but it was also educational, and the people who came out were really remarkable. Some of them were both medically trained and theologically trained, and they would come out and learn Arabic and translate books into Arabic, English books into Arabic, medical texts, because the medical school started there right away, shortly after the founding of the university. And it's called American University of Beirut, and it has truly become part of Beirut, and it stands for the mixing of all peoples in that region. I have to also start with 1920, when my parents-in-law, Malcolm's parents, went out to work with the nearest relief, actually at the end of World War I. They were, I'd say, humanitarian workers. My mother-in-law was under a church group, but my father-in-law was definitely going out there for humanitarian needs. And they took care of orphans who were created by the genocide in Turkey. And I use that word advisedly because I know it's controversial, but I think that it can be termed that way. Anyway, lots of orphans left, and my parents-in-law tried to gather them together and founded orphanages in Lebanon for these children. And we still hear today from some of these young people who were descendants, maybe grandchildren of these orphans who were there. So that's where our family history in the Middle East starts, with Elsa and Stanley Kerr, wonderful people, and maybe set a tone for their children and for their grandchildren and now great-grandchildren for this kind of international work. I sailed on a ship for 17 days to get to Beirut, the Dutch freighter, with some other students and young teachers. And it was a magnificent, magical experience because we stopped in only one place along the way. We stopped in Casablanca and went ashore for the day. And I heard the first guttural sounds of the Arabic language, which sounded very strange, but eventually then on shore, I heard the call to prayer. And there was something magical and mystical about that call to prayer. And I grant you, it was an impressionable young 20-year-old who thought, it remains in my mind as something haunting, mystical, and something beautiful. It's very special. And I'm sure you all experience that here. We do have the call to prayer right on campus sometimes, or in the mosque. So then on to Beirut, another 5 days across the Mediterranean, and met by a representative from AUB and taken to the campus where I met my 4 roommates whom I was to live with for the year, 4 wonderful young women who I think were my biggest education on the Middle East, living together in a, room maybe half this size. 2 Palestinians. One was Baha'i, one was Greek Orthodox, one Muslim from Lebanon, a Shiite, but we didn't know anything. We didn't pay attention to those things in those days. Shiite, Sunni, and Greek Orthodox, Syrian Orthodox, and then an Iraqi from the Mosul area, from a church, from the Syrian Orthodox Church. So this was a wonderful combination of people whom I learned from during that time. Then, of course, a little bit later, I did meet someone else whom I was very attracted to, and that was my husband, Malcolm. And we happened to take an Ottoman history class together. And he knew everything. We had to learn all the names of the Ottoman sultans, and he knew them all. And so he would help me with homework, but that only lasted for a while until we developed a much more interesting friendship than just Ottoman history. Favorite part of the year, of course. I guess I'd like to stop here for a minute just to say a little bit about the atmosphere on campus at AUB in those days. Stop and think about it. 1954 was only 6 years after the establishment of Israel. And for those of you who know that area, you'll know that it was a time of developing of Arab nationalism and of Pan-Arabism, which is not so significant these days, but it bears an important role, an important part of the in the Arab world still. So we were caught up in this. There were professors on the campus who were great scholars of Arab history and Islamic history, and I think that was very much imprinted on me in a much more sort of not as intellectually deep as I think it became over the years. So that was the atmosphere at AUB. Besides having a very good liberal arts education, which I know professors here teaches at MSU, the emphasis on the liberal arts, very important, and that's very important at AUB. So from I'll just skip ahead a little bit, because after some finishing of graduate work back in the US, Malcolm and I returned to the campus and had our first 2 children there, which included John Kerr, sitting right there. and so we were starting our family in the Middle East, as well as teaching, and Malcolm teaching, and I participating in AUB life whenever I could. I think the atmosphere had maybe changed each time we went back, and for me, this ability to look at Arab culture and reflect on it and go back to our own country made for a richer experience than if we had just studied it from this country or remained in Lebanon for duration. So we had this ability to look at things each time, and it changed so rapidly. But we were, Malcolm was always criticized for being either too pro-Arab or too pro-Israeli. He was very even-handed, fair-minded, in his analysis of both sides of the situation. And of course, that much more so than it is right today, was a key tension in the Middle East. And it was certainly paramount. Even to this day, you can hardly talk about Israel in Lebanon, as many of you know. And Lebanon will probably be the last country to ever have a peace agreement with Israel. But we were caught up in that, certainly, and with our own family, going back and forth, and this wonderful balance between living abroad and coming back and developing this pursuing this international understanding between our two countries, our two regions. In 1958, we had gone back to Lebanon, and there was a civil war. And for those of you who are from that region, you might remember that was the first time the Marines went onto the beaches and sold local boys sold Coca-Cola to them for $1 a can, which was a lot of money in those days. And the Civil War ended without a solution, as wars increasingly in Lebanon did. So it was let's see what they call it, not vanquished. No victories, no vanquished. The fragility of the sectarian balance was very evident then, as it is now, even much more so now. Each time we went back, as I was saying, something more had happened. The Baghdad Pact in 1958, and this is all ancient history for some of you guys. Again, positioning East and West, and trying to bring, and the U.S. was always trying to keep its hand in things there. Now, I think I'll just move ahead to the period after our children got a little bit older, and it was especially relevant to try and include their education in a situation where we wanted to make sure they had a base in America, and I hope they appreciate it, that we kept their base in America, but wanted them to also have this experience overseas, which I think they value this day, and so they tell me. And as I mentioned, three of our children were born in an AUB hospital, and that's one of Lebanon's claims to fame, that they have the basketball player from they were born in Beirut. But I'm here tonight to support my son John, who I'm so glad to have as a source of pride in this arena, and not just have to go to the basketball world with my family. I have a daughter. She's the first child, and she lives in England. And she was called to work in politics to bring people together in her community. That is certainly something that was, I think, instilled in her by her upbringing in the Middle East and wanting to. The wonderful quote you said, bring people together, and she tries very hard to do that. So that's, I like to say I have 2 PhDs and 1 MBA and 1 MBA and 1 MBA. So that's all 4 of my kids. I'm very proud of them all. As John mentioned, now there are 8 grandchildren and even a little 2-week-old great grandchild, which is pretty amazing to have happen. Now, I'd really love to respond to some of your stories from the Middle East. And I know with you AUB graduates, it would be lovely to hear some of what you have to say as far as your experiences there. But before we do that in the discussion period, I'd like to just talk about how AUB has continued through this last terrible period of Lebanon. As you know, the country is almost a failed state, and AUB is one of the things that really keeps it moving, keeps it, people have confidence that AUB is thriving. So indeed, it is. And I just went to a board meeting of the university and was really, really proud of what was going on there now. Instead of trying to dig into the past or give in to despair, AUB is moving into a new form of internationalism, trying to instill this great spirit of AUB, of bringing people together in a more international frame. So they're starting a whole outreach to build a twin campus, and the possibility is in Cyprus, starting one there, and an old Dibs factory. You know, Dibs, molasses. Yeah, there's a beautiful old building there that will be the sort of centerpiece of the campus, and that's probably going to happen, and it's very exciting. And it's made the faculty who have remained there more involved and feeling a part of the university. 1/3 of the faculty have left. The hospital is a very important part of AUB, and again, a huge number of doctors left. There is another possibility of starting a campus in Dubai, which is a little more problematic, but the outreach would be terrific. There are still 6,000 students at AUB, and we're expecting almost that many in the next academic year, which is pretty amazing considering. But of course, they have this problem of dollars, fresh dollars versus old dollars, and some of you from Lebanon know about this tremendous burden on people there not being able to afford things, and poverty is rampant, 60 or 70%. But it makes me very proud that AUB continues, and in this dynamic way, we have a wonderful board of trustees who are engaged. They're from all over the world. We even had a German there this time, whose wife is from Birzeit and in Palestine, and she's a doctor as well, and they're doing these joint projects with Birzeit University. You all know of that, Birzeit in Palestine, and MIT, where they work. So there are all sorts of things that are hopeful, and in spite of the despair that is easy to feel in these times, it's. I was so uplifted by this meeting, and wanted to transmit that to you all. Now, I know a lot of you are from other parts of the world, Pakistan, Iran, and Ghana, back there, not Ghana, yeah, Africa. And so I wonder if how you are feeling this potential for bringing East and West together, or bringing, maybe we shouldn't say East and West anymore, we should say different disparate parts of our society, our global society together. I'd love to hear from any of you who have ideas and thoughts about where you are. And I'd like to answer questions too, any more questions you might have about our family history in the Middle East. Oh, okay. Excuse me, you know what I wanted to do? Because I wanted to announce my thanks publicly to John and Kim for the scholarship that they started. And you can imagine how proud it makes me. I don't want to get too sentimental here. At MSU. I thought, since Malcolm is so much a part of tonight, it's been a long time since his death, but he's very much a part of our lives in our interior lives, at least mine. It's amazing how a lost person can just be part of your life, in any case, in some realm or wherever. But I thought it would be appropriate to read something that Malcolm wrote in a book called The Elusive Peace in the Middle East, which he actually edited and completed at UCLA in 1973. He wrote of the complexities underlying the process of finding a solution to the Arab-Israeli problem in 1975. He says the best way to begin a book about peace in the Middle East is to acknowledge that it is not a promising subject. He was never one to hide sometimes pessimistic thoughts or realistic thoughts. Everything in its historical record must encourage the most pervasive pessimism. While it is good to favor peace, comforting in supposing that peace is within the realm of ordinary people in the world, and I need my glasses. Just 1 second. They're right there on top. Good. Wait for the ending. That's what's so prophetic about today. It applies to today. And that's why not just me, but many people think that his work was very, very huge perspective, a long perspective on the world. While it is good to favor peace, comforting to suppose that peace is what the mass of ordinary people in the world desire, and tempting to ascribe the persistence of conflict to needless fears and misunderstandings. In the Middle East, it is too late for such simple-mindedness. Clearly, we are contending with fundamental difficulties, so that peace has been, at best, an intermediate objective for some, and indeed a negative value for others. At key moments, the prolongation of the conflict has always been a tolerable price to pay, if it was a peace price at all, for the pursuit of other interests. That's key. This holds true not only for Israelis and Arabs, but for the leading members of the United Nations, notably the United States. Not only Arabs and Israelis have widely differing visions of the conflict between them, but outsiders too. Statesmen, journalists, academic, men in the street. The disparities among statesmen's perspective add to the difficulties of negotiation, and ultimately the same must be said about men in the street. Different men in different streets, conditioned in part by what their own political leaders and newspapers tell them. And I thought this was prophetic because today we are so burdened with this very thing. So that